Hey everyone, welcome to the Dill Pickle Movie Network. I am Dylan Randazzo, and welcome to another video in a series of videos that I will be covering as part of my 2013 retrospective. I've been doing this on the channel for the past 2 months and on my Letterboxd account where I've been going through literally every movie I can in 2013. So if you want to see a written review for every single one of those movies that I'm covering in this retrospective, you can check out my Letterboxd. But I wanted to devote an entire video to something that I'm very passionate about, and that is A24. A24 is a studio that actually started in 2012, but didn't have a film released in theaters until 2013. And I thought this is a perfect opportunity to kind of open a conversation about A24, really focus on this first year of filmmaking. 5 films came out in that first year of A24 in wide release. There are some movies that are technically 2013 releases that wouldn't get a theatrical release until 2014, movies like Enemy and Locke and Under the Skin that I did not include in this video just for the sake of saving it for next year, because I'm probably going to be doing this every year forward as part of these retrospectives. But I wanted to talk about the 5 movies that were released in 2013 to see how they hold up 10 years later, because A24 is pretty much the biggest indie studio right now. It's the one with the most notoriety, the most awards last year. I mean, it won Best Picture, Director, Actor, Actress, Supporting Actor, Screenplay. It racked up the wins at the Academy Awards. So A24 has really made a name for themselves in the 10 years since its dawning and its spawning. But I really think it's interesting to go back to the origins and see exactly what A24 was built on and to see how much they've evolved. And it really is an eclectic bunch of films. These films, some of them borrow similar themes from one another, but they're all distinctly unique. But I think that's what A24's brand is, bringing stories that are not necessarily mainstream and trying to make them mainstream by getting notable actors, notable directors, but still keeping it at a smaller budget and a small scale. And I think that's what A24 has built its success on. I mean, it won 2 Best Picture awards already in just a span of 10 years with Moonlight and Everything Everywhere All at Once. But it has gone on to build a legacy even outside its Oscar films for its horror and for its coming of age films. I mean, A24 has a wide span breadth of genres that it's dealing with, but it has essentially kind of become its own brand where people see A24 and they know what they can expect. Not necessarily aesthetically per se. I mean, sometimes you can expect what to see aesthetically, but you just know the vibe is going to be a little different. There's going to be almost a elevated nature to these stories because it is A24. And that's not to say every A24 film is great. In fact, I think the worst A24 film ever made comes from this first year, this first wave of A24 films. But I think it's really interesting to see this evolution. It is such a unique studio, and we've seen other studios kind of replicate a similar thing. Neon being an example of a studio that has kind of built its own singular voice. Blumhouse, another one that kind of takes these small budgets and makes big hits, and sometimes it's hit or miss, but of course those hits really compensate for those misses, and that's another case for A24. So it's really cool to look at these 5 films especially because this is the birth of A24. A24 was founded by Daniel Katz, David Finkel, and John Hodges, as I said, in 2012, and of course their first film was released in 2013 with a glimpse inside the mind of Charles Swan III. More on that later. The name A24 actually came from a motorway, an Italian motorway that Katz was driving on when he decided to found the company. So there's really no significance to A24 aside from the location Katz was in when he founded it. Guggenheim Partners, a company that Katz formerly led the finance group for, decided to provide the seed money for A24. And the whole notion of A24 when it started, the company wanted to share movies from a distinctive point of view. That was their goal, is to show things from very distinct points of view. And I think that is really what A24 has continued to build their brand on. And it has made for some really exciting films, some really exciting television. I mean, Euphoria is an A24 product. And like I said, it's kind of formed its own brand that is singular from anything else going on in the film industry now, especially amongst all the blockbusters, which are sometimes great, but can sometimes be a little exhausting. Like, do you really want to be going to these big studio, corporate mandated, giant blockbusters all the time? Or do you want to settle in with a nice little indie flick every now and again? And I think A24 provides a really nice balance to the mainstream stuff we're seeing in cinema today. But let's talk about these 5 films. This is a 2013 retrospective, so I wanted to kind of do a little mini review for each of these films, talk about a few of them that I've seen before and see how they have aged 10 years later, and some of them that I've never seen before, but also look at them in a lens of 10 years later, starting with Roman Coppola's A Glimpse Inside the Mind of Charles Swan III. Now, this is the first A24 film, and you would think, A24 is so successful, so clearly their first film must have been like a giant hit to continue to inspire A24 to make these movies, and I can tell you that is absolutely not the case. I think this film is as I alluded to earlier, probably the worst film I've seen from A24, period. And I think that's really interesting because you look at Pixar with Toy Story, you look at the MCU with Iron Man. These are some big hits that allowed for their franchises or their brands to grow. Whereas here, I think this is something that could easily doom a studio if they had really put a ton of money into it, a ton of resources. This is something that could cause a studio to fail because I think it's a very, very bad movie. But it's really interesting because I think the talent attached to it is kind of what keeps it afloat. It still has some notoriety because of who's in it. This is a film that stars Jason Schwartzman, Bill Murray, Patricia Arquette, Aubrey Plaza, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Stephen Dorff, Dermot Mulroney. It's directed by Roman Coppola, the Coppola family, the guy who made The Godfather. That's an interesting way to get eyes on a film, especially when you're starting a studio, and you don't necessarily know if the actual product is going to be great. At least having these names attached to it generates a little bit of buzz, even though I really haven't heard much buzz of this film since, and I think it's because it's not that great. But this film takes place inside the mind of its lead actor that I've not mentioned yet, but it is Charlie Sheen playing Charles Swan III.
Ivana, can't we just talk? I'm hit.
Charles Swan III is dumped by his girlfriend Ivana, and it basically sends his life into a tailspin where he starts to have all these fever dreams of his relationships and nightmares and his life hitting rock bottom. And a lot of great films, especially in the A24 canon, have dealt with this kind of psyche. Beau is Afraid is a recent one that deals a lot with the mind turmoil of relationships and anxiety and all that. But I think in this case, I think because you're spending so much time in the mind of Charlie Sheen, I think there's almost a meta nature to it where how much time do you actually want to spend inside the mind of Charlie Sheen?
Look at that. Howdy, ladies.
I don't think he's necessarily the best actor. I have seen some of his stuff. I've liked some of his stuff, but especially because of who we know as Charlie Sheen as a person and just kind of his reputation. I think this was an interesting choice, but I think it's very much an experiment. This very much feels like a test run for something later. Like, let's get a bunch of stars. Let's kind of make this wacky, zany, very colorful, well shot film. I think it's well shot. I mean, it's well executed for what it is, but make it very visual, very experimental, and see where it goes. It doesn't leave that profound of an effect, at least on me. I mean, there's definitely an audience for this, probably, but I do think this is one of A24's lesser efforts. And as far as I know, as far as from what I've seen, probably the least favorite A24 film I've seen.
You're incredibly irresponsible.
You don't listen.
You're crazy. You're selfish. You're not the only person, Charles.
The next film we're going to be talking about, however, is Ginger and Rosa by Sally Potter. And this is really awesome because this is the second film for A24, and it's already a film directed by a woman, centered around female characters. I think it's really awesome, especially looking at their entire filmography, to see A24 include as many voices as possible. White voices, black voices, indigenous voices, Asian voices, international voices, American voices, all the voices it can get. A24 is really a melting pot for so much different representation. It's about two best friends, Ginger and Rosa, as they deal with their life kind of going through its own turmoil. A lot of these films deal with like this kind of inner emotional turmoil. In Ginger's case, she is very fixated on the Cuban Missile Crisis. She's drawn to anti-nuclear movements and talking about nuclear destruction and nuclear warfare. It's just a topic that interests her.
The whole world could be blown to pieces any minute.
My darling Ginger.
Well, she's right. It is getting serious.
Whereas Rosa, she's dealing with her relationship with Ginger's father, which is a little weird. It's about one of these girls dating another girl's father after a divorce. But you start to see how these two kind of sides collide and how their friendship kind of pushes and pulls because one is dating the other girl's father, and one girl is so fixated on the Cuban Missile Crisis and nuclear warfare that her mind is solely there, and she can't spend time thinking about her best friend and her father, something she never thought she'd have to deal with. And I think it's much more interesting in premise than it is in execution. This is a film that takes its time, maybe a little too much. I think it's a little sluggish at times, but I think the performances are great. I think Elle Fanning is really solid playing Ginger. I mean, naming a character Ginger just because their hair is red, it feels like not the most inspired screenwriting choice, but it is a choice nonetheless. I think Sally Potter does a good job directing some of these moments, especially some of the character moments, especially some of the unspoken moments. When we're first getting teases of this relationship, there's a really awesome shot where you can kind of see the father, played by Alessandro Nivola's eyes kind of through the rearview mirror, and then you kind of see Rosa's eyes meet his in this rearview mirror. I just really like kind of the use of a small budget to still create a profound cinematic effect. And that's another thing with A24 is they do a good job kind of using their resources to the best of their abilities. Unfortunately, I just didn't think the story went in a direction that was super satisfying. Sure, there are lessons learned for these characters. Sure, these characters grow. There are full arcs for these characters, but I never felt that extra oomph. You know, it never really went to that next full mile. It kind of just tapered out and kind of stayed plateaued at a certain tone. The basis plot here and the basic ideas and themes here are really successful. It just didn't really go that extra mile for me to where I don't think I would necessarily recommend this or go back to see this. But again, this is A24 kind of finding its grounding, and it would very soon, as we'll find out, really take off in the next few years and even in the next few films. Speaking of the next few films, next up is Spring Breakers by Harmony Korine. This is a film that I think a lot of people know as the film where everyone gets naked on spring break, does drugs, there's a lot of women running around in skimpy bikinis, and James Franco does his most wild drug dealer performance of all time.
Bikinis and big booties, y'all, that's what life is about.
I think, yes, on a surface level, that is what Spring Breakers is about. And honestly, 10 years ago when this came out and when I had heard about it, when I'd seen posters for it, because naturally, I'm a kid who grew up on Disney Channel. So seeing Selena Gomez and Vanessa Hudgens here in this movie, I was intrigued for those very surface level reasons. And I watched the film and I was like, yeah, I mean, that was exactly what I expected. But I think it's not till I watched it, this most recent watch, where I realized there's a lot more that Spring Breakers is trying to say than what its surface level kind of indicates. And I think a lot of people give it an unfair rap because they think it's just this trashy film about these people partying on spring break. And I think the whole point of the film is to show that artifice to then be able to strip it back and kind of get to the core of what it's trying to say. And that is basically being a commentary for a very specific generation, a very specific lifestyle and culture, and almost kind of being a criticism of that culture more than anything. I know there are parts where it seems like some of these moments are being glorified or romanticized, but I think the characters in the film can romanticize something, whereas the audience watching the film can understand that those characters' romanticization of that thing is not necessarily something to be romanticized by the audience itself. That was a very convoluted statement that I just said, but it's a thing we see in a lot of films, especially films dealing with some pretty touchy subject matter, like Licorice Pizza or Red Rocket, dealing with these big age gap relationships. It's like you're not supposed to necessarily root for these relationships. You're not supposed to advocate. The film isn't advocating for this. The characters in the film are very much romanticizing this idea, but we, the audience, through our own intellectual thinking, are able to kind of piece it together that film is more of a criticism than it is a glorification of it. And I think that's what Spring Breakers does really well. And honestly, of all the films I've watched in this retrospective, both for these videos and outside these videos on my Letterboxd, of all the films I watched, this one probably increased the most in how much I loved it, because I think, yeah, this is a film that I think with more viewings, you can kind of start to see what it's about more and more. You can look behind the curtain and figure out exactly what the filmmaker is trying to say about a certain culture and almost the tragedy of certain cultures. And I love Selena Gomez's character in particular in this film because she's kind of like that person walking the tightrope between good and evil.
And sunshine. Wakey, wakey. Shine, little bitch. Where's the money? Money. For what?
You know, she's seeing all this stuff go down and she kind of wants to be the moral compass and say, this doesn't feel right. What we're doing just isn't right. But then also trying her best to still fit in and feel peer pressure to go about it and participate in these actions, but then eventually having to kind of step back and leave. And, you know, her absence from the film is felt throughout the rest of the film when she leaves the film. And I think it's definitely purposeful and intentional to paint this overall picture of a very specific society that it wants to depict. And I think aside from the themes and what is going on with the context and subtext of the film, I think it's just really well made. I think some of the actual cinematography is very inventive, some very unique shots in this film. Yes, there's a lot of vulgar stuff in it, but I think it's really captured in an interesting way. There's a lot of use of montage that is really striking in this film, a lot of cuts back and forth, kind of repetition of montage. You start to see certain sequences over and over again, but through very slightly altered perspectives to where it almost creates a different effect every time you see the scene over. I could go on and on about how much I enjoy Spring Breakers, mostly just because I'm so surprised I liked it so much on the second watch. As I've gotten older, especially watching watching all these A24 films and realizing that usually what's on the surface is something that needs to be penetrated and looked at in a much further lens. I think Spring Breakers is definitely one of those films that when I went back to watch it, I opened my mind even more to it, and I was able to see all the intricacies of what it is trying to say. And I am a big fan. I think the performances are really good. Like I said, Selena Gomez is my favorite standout performance, but Vanessa Hudgens does a great job. She's not just that High School Musical girl anymore. She's really digging into some very different territory in her acting and her performance. And James Franco, say what you will about James Franco, he's a slime ball in real life, but I honestly think it works for this film because he's a slime ball in this film.
Why are you here?
I saw y'all in there. They like nice people. Come on, y'all. Why acting suspicious?
And there's, again, this sense of tragedy almost to his character and to some of these characters where you kind of feel bad for them and you feel like they're almost going down a hopeless path. But you also understand there's like an empathy there for them as well, to where you honestly kind of understand them, even if you can't agree with them. And it's so amazing. It's really amazing. It's a film that I did not think I would like as much as I did on a rewatch. And it not only has one, but two Britney Spears needle drops that are so well executed.
Every time I try to fly, I fall without my wings. I feel so small.
Chef's kiss. Like, what a perfect way to interweave music and popular music to fit the context and the vibe of the movie it's in.
And I must confess, I still believe.
It's really just a well done movie. And I think if you did knock Spring Breakers at first for being just this raunchy, kind of vulgar film, I implore you to check it out again and look at it from a lens of understanding kind of what the filmmaker wants to say about these types of people rather than trying to advocate for these types of people. And I really think it could open your mind to something worthwhile, as it did mine.
This is the American dream, y'all.
The fourth film we're going to be talking about is Sofia Coppola's The Bling Ring. Now, out of all these directors, Sofia Coppola is probably the most well-known person to make a film in this first wave of A24 films, a seasoned director getting to kind of flex their abilities with a small budget in this A24 studio. And we've seen it with a few directors since. The Bling Ring is honestly a really cool change of pace for Sofia Coppola. Sofia Coppola, I have not seen all her films, but a lot of her films are almost a little dreary, almost a little melancholy. But The Bling Ring, while it does have some like kind of dark and upsetting undertones, is actually really funny and really entertaining and has a good energy to it, especially in its first half. This centers around a group of teens who basically find locations of different celebrities throughout Hollywood and learn that they can break into their houses and steal shit for their own personal gain. And it's really troubling. It's like Spring Breakers, where you're not necessarily meant to root for these characters, but there's enough empathy given to these characters to where you can understand their motives and their mindsets throughout the film while not advocating for anything they're doing and kind of criticizing what they're doing and looking at them and saying, whoa, that's an overstepping of boundaries.
I just think we wanted to be a part of like the lifestyle that everybody kind of wants.
And I think the cast sells it so well. Emma Watson in particular, this is such a 180 from Hermione Granger, but it's such a refreshing 180. She's playing this girl who, when the camera's off of her, is kind of very rebellious, kind of dark, has an edge to her. But then when the cameras are on, she's like, OMG, she's very Valley Girl, and everything she says is like very artificial and like super over the top. And it's like one of these great commentaries on like a modern culture, on this influencer kind of culture that I really like.
I'm a firm believer in karma. And I think this situation was attracted into my life as a huge learning lesson for me.
A24 is also a great reflection of culture and what is happening in the now in society. And like I said, Sofia Coppola's films can get a little melancholy, but this one I think kind of relishes in the fun of its premise until it doesn't. You know, it does have to take that dramatic turn at the end. And honestly, I felt like when it took that dramatic turn at the end, it didn't seem to have the same gravitas that I would have liked it to have. But that first half where they're kind of like getting into the crime and you kind of start to see how they kind of mask themselves when they're on camera versus not on camera, and when they're talking to people outside their circle to when they're in their circle. I think that stuff is the most interesting. There's a really awesome shot where they're robbing a house and you literally see everything from a mile away with the camera focused on the house, and you see the characters kind of running around the house with very little sound. You just can kind of see the visual. But it's cool to see these directors still working within their small budgets, but pulling off some pretty cool cinematic shots like that one, like some other ones. You know, you're getting some good names here. here to give some great performances. Vera Farmiga's little sister Tessa is really good in this film as well. I really like this film. I think it's a really well assembled ensemble. It has a lot of fun moments, but again, it's like Spring Breakers in the fact that it's a commentary about a specific generation and a specific lifestyle more so than it is a romanticization of it. And I think that's what these films do so successfully, and The Bling Ring definitely does successfully. And lastly, we're going to be talking about James Ponsoldt's The Spectacular Now. This is a film I watched a few years ago, and I fell in love with it. It's just such a charming love story. It centers around Sutter and Amy, played by Miles Teller and Shailene Woodley, and it just kind of plays out as this natural romance where these two souls kind of meet on a whim. He passes out in his front lawn, she's doing a paper route, and she runs into him, and they meet each other. It's a very interesting meet cute.
Hey,
Where the hell am I?
do you live around here, Sutter?
How do you know my name?
You go to the same school.
It's not anything too fantastical, but you really see this genuine connection off the bat, and you can see how these two grow together and really fall in love in such an honest and natural way. And I think that's the strength of Spectacular Now, is the honesty and rawness of the relationship. A lot of the film is actually improvised. A lot of the actors kind of had free reign to kind of go off script, and it shows because these conversations feel natural. When an actor messes up a line, it doesn't feel like an actor messing up a line. It feels like the character themselves stumbling over their words because they're so in love they don't know what to say. And I really like that. I like when an actor can kind of just live in the moment and feel free to be messy. You know, it's okay. Lives are messy. It's okay if we're messy, especially when we're in love. You know, we have different ways we go about being in love, and sometimes we get giddy and sometimes we trip over our words, and I love that aspect of it.
What's your story?
I don't really have any stories.
What do you mean? Everyone's got a story.
I don't know. I'd like to think that there's more to a person than just one thing.
But in the second half of the film, it becomes more so about Sutter and his own personal journey in his exploration of his past, and that Amy kind of aids that and helps him through that. Amy is definitely a supporting character in the second half, more so than a lead character. It becomes more about Miles Teller's Sutter, but I didn't mind that because I think Sutter is obviously going through a lot more shit than Amy is. Amy kind of has her life figured out. She knows what she wants. She knows her ambitions. She knows her goals, where Sutter's totally lost because he needs to get over this piece of trauma from his childhood. And as you start to see his answers come to light, you start to see how it almost kind of destructs his present day life with Amy and their relationship, to where there are some unsatisfying moments where you just kind of want to yell at them and be like, guys, but you're in love, stop fighting. But that's, again, a testament to how well written this film is. Michael H. Weber and Scott Neustadtler wrote the script, and James Ponsoldt's direction. I think they just get such a rawness and realness from this relationship, to where when there are moments of tension, when there are moments of sadness and despair, you know, you, the audience, are so frustrated because you want it to work out so well, but that's a testament to how well the relationship is written. And at the end, it has some bittersweet notes. You know, there's some sad parts to the ending, but there's some hopeful parts, but there isn't like a definitive happily ever after romantic ending either. You know, it does kind of leave things a little open-ended, which is a little frustrating every time I watch it, because I'm just one of those hopeless romantic optimists that wants this closure and finality. But there is also something that works so well within this context for this film, where I think if you had ended the film any other way, it wouldn't have been as satisfying. It wouldn't have felt as right as this ending does. I'm not going to spoil the ending because I think it's worth a watch. It is one of my favorite films to come out of A24 period, but especially in this first wave of 5.
I hear this is beautiful. This is the youngest that we're ever going to be. This is our time. Live in the now.
So those are my reviews for the first 5 A24 films. Like I said, there's other films that premiered in festivals in 2013 that didn't get wide release till 2014. So maybe I'll make a video next year when I do my 2014 retrospective talking about those films. But if I had to do a basic ranking of these 5 films, because it's always fun to rank things, at the bottom is definitely A Glimpse Inside the Mind of Charles Swan III. I just didn't really care for it. Then above that is the second film, Ginger and Rosa. Then above that, I'd put The Bling Ring, just because I think the first half is stronger than the second. Then I'd actually put The Spectacular Now. I really like it. It's a really charming love story. And then at number 1, I can't believe I'm doing this, but I'm putting Spring Breakers, just because it got the biggest reaction from me the second time around, to where I was able to really kind of finally understand what it was. And it really does feel like this definitive film for a very specific generation. It feels like the most 2013 film of 2013. I think that says a lot about its power. So all those films are worth watching if you want to full lens of this first birth of A24. But of these films, I definitely recommend those first three a lot. Spring Breakers, spectacular now in the Bling Ring, especially Spring Breakers, because I think it gets a bad rap, and I'm here to reappraise it, baby. But that was my review for all 5 of the first A24 films. Now, looking forward, I'm excited to talk about A24 as it evolves, maybe if I keep doing these retrospectives, as I said. But looking forward, in this retrospective, you can go to my Letterboxd to find even more reviews for all other films of 2013. And in just a week or two, you will find my video for my top 10 films of 2013 period. And there's a chance 1 or 2 of these A24 films may even crack that top 10. We'll just have to wait and see. Thank you guys so much for watching. One last thing I wanted to bring up, I wanted to thank all the people who donated as part of this subathon back in February. They helped donate to this channel, but they have also been great supports in other ways, mentally, emotionally, and just being subscribers of this channel. It goes a long way. And if you want to subscribe to this channel, if you want to like this video, comment this video, it helps this channel grow. It helps me give me more resources to make more videos and watch more movies and spend more time doing what I love, and that is talking to you all about great movies or bad movies, but also great movies. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.